Today's Yomi is 138. Today's Yomi is Bava Basra Kuf Lamed Chet. We're going to start on the bottom of Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis Baruch Atah Adonai Mocham Shakol Nir B'Gvarol. So we're going to start at 4 lines from the bottom on Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Kosev Nechasav Achar. Somebody says, "I'm going to give you my assets." He wants to give them Amar Hala Shiban. He says, "I want to give it to you as a gift." He says, "No, I don't want them." Kana, he's acquired them. Afil Omei V'Tzavech. Even if he's sitting there screaming, "I don't want them," he's acquired them. Before you get all upset, the Gemara is going to qualify this. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lo Kana. So it seems crazy. You say you don't want it, you automatically acquire it, and that's no good. So Amar Rabbi Abba Mama Lo Pligi. They're not arguing. The first case where we say he doesn't acquire it is where from the beginning, from the outset, he's screaming, "I don't want it, I don't want it." Why does he say he does? And then he doesn't acquire it. Why? Why hasn't he acquired it where he screams, "I don't want it"? Because the concept is you don't want to accept the gifts because too much gifts that you accept is a problem. So the proverb says don't accept the gifts. V'kan b'shosek meikara. But if you're quiet from the beginning and then you cried out, then in fact, if you're quiet from the beginning and then you cry out, then it's too late and you've already acquired it. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Zika lo yidei acher v'shasak u'besof tzavach banu machokas Rabbi Shimon Gamliel v'Rabbanan. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, let's say you acquired it from the outset and then you were quiet. Excuse me. So there's a third party involved, and the person who wants to give you the gift doesn't give it to him directly, he gives it to a third party. And he was quiet. The guy who was supposed to be receiving it sees this taking place, and he's quiet. And in the end, he screams out, he says, "No, I don't want it." Well, that's actually machokes in that case between Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and the Rabbanan. The Tanya, as we learned in the Brayso, let's say you write your assets to somebody else, and in these assets were slaves. He says, "I don't want them." If the second person was a Kohen who he was giving it to, he's able to eat from the truma because he's acquired it, even though he says he doesn't want it to slaves. Or Shpag says, since the guy says, "I don't want them," in that case, his heirs, the heirs of the person who was giving away, once the other person says, "I don't want them," then according to Shpag, it doesn't go ownerless; it goes back to his heirs. That's Rashbag's position. But so Havinaba, the Tanakama feel Omeid Vitzav. The heirs of the person giving it, meaning to say this guy's giving it to him, and then he's giving it to him. Well, he died at that point. It doesn't become ownerless, is the point. It goes back to his heirs. The Gemara says, so Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Kivin Shamar Ala Yevshba Kvar Zachu Ba and Yorchin. Havinaba. The Tanakama feel Omeid V'Tzavach, and you say, wait, one second, according to Tanakama, even if he's sitting there screaming, he wants it, he doesn't want it, he's still forced to get it. So I'm a Rabbi Yochanan B'Tzavach Meikaro Kol Yamo Pligidu Lo Kani. If he's screaming from the outset, everybody says he doesn't acquire it. Shata Kol B'Sav Tzavach. If he is quiet and then he screams out Kol Yamo Pligidu Kani, everybody says he's acquired it. Ki Pligi. Where do we say that there is a dispute? Where he gave it to a third person to accept on behalf of the other person, and the guy who's supposed to be receiving it is quiet, and in the end he cries out. The Tanakamas of the position, from the fact that he was quiet, it shows he acquires it. And the reason why he's crying out now, he's trying to reverse his position, but that's too late. Whereas Rashbag Sever, no, from the fact that he's crying out now, it shows what his mindset was at the beginning. And the reason why he didn't cry out until now is the Sever, because he thought to himself, well, until I get it, why do I have to cry out? He didn't realize that he should have cried out the minute the other person was accepting on his behalf. Well, the tricky case. Tana Rabbanan Shchiv Mara. So now we have another case. The guy is sick, and he says, "Tenu Masayim Zuz Laponi. Give 200 zuz to this man. V'shalosh Meos Laponi. 300 to this man. V'ara Meos Laponi. And 400 to this man." Ein omrim call them mishtar zacha. And then we don't say that whoever came first got it first. Whoever he said first got it first. Because he can't say all three things at the same time. So it's like he's saying, give it to them simultaneously. So therefore, if there's a note against the estate, they collect from all of them equally. Meaning to say, let's say there's notes for $200, you would take 200 off the top. And so then, therefore, you'd have to divide up the 200, 300, 400 out of 700 proportionally. You have to divide up out of 700. But, however, if he says give 200 to this man and after him to this man and after him to this man, we say whoever comes first in this contract got the money first. And so or in this gift got the money first. So therefore, if there's a note against the estate, you collect it all from the last person. Even though the last person was 400, you would collect it all 400 from that person before going back to the person who's 300. And so you go, in that case, that last person was last in line to get, so therefore he's the first in line to be collected from. Tana Rabbana, next case, Shliv Marasha Amar. So let's say you have a person who's a Shliv Mara, this person who's lying sick, and he said, Tanu Masayim Zilzal Ploni, B'ni Bachor Kiro'ilo. He says, give 200 zuz to my son, who's the firstborn, Kiro'ilo, as it's fitting for him. So what does that mean, Kiro'ilo? Does it mean give him the 200 zuz, which is basically his firstborn entitlement, or give him 200 zuz in addition to his firstborn, because he's a good guy, Kiro'ilo. So if he says that expression, that language, karoilo, it means notlin v'notos b'charos. He takes the 200 zuz and he gets his firstborn share. But if he says im amar bib charaso, but if he says give it to him for his firstborn payment, then yadu al yona. Then in those circumstances, he has the upper hand, and he can either take his firstborn share or the 200 zuz. Rata notlin, rata nota b'charoso. That's case number one. Case number two is Shlimer Shamar Tenu Matayim Zuzul Poni Ishti Karoila. He says give 200 zuz to my wife because it's fitting for her. Then it means no tlon v'no telos es ksuva. So it means she takes the 200 zuz and she takes her ksuva because it means not as a payment for what I owe her, but in addition to her ksuva, because she's a good wife. But imam or big suvasa, we're on top of 138b, Daniel, 138b. If he says give it to her as her ksuva, then yada al yona, then she has the upper hand. Ratza no tawasa, and if she wants, she could take the money, or ratza no telas ksuvasa, or she could take the ksuva. This shlimera shamar, in third case, if there's a person who is a shlimera, Sha'amar Tenu Masayim Zos Poni Bal Chovi Kiroilo. He says, give it to my the person who I owe the money to, as is fitting for him. No Tlan v'no Toas Chovo. He takes that and also the money that he owes him. Vim Amar Bichovo. He says, give it as my debt. No Tlan Bichovo. He takes it as his debt. So the Gemara asks the question only on the third one, but really the question is he asking only on the third one, or is he asking on the first two as well? We'll see. Because he says it's fitting for him, he takes that and takes also his extra debt. Maybe it only means that's fitting for him for his debt. So before we go into the answer, the question is this a question just only on the third one, or is it also on the first two? The Gemara only put it on the third one, the debt, but according to Rabbeinu Gershon, you could have asked it on the first two cases, his firstborn and his wife. But it only answers it because that's the third one. That's what Rashbam says. But the Rimigash and the Yad Ramah, they say, no, by a firstborn and his wife, the Gemara is assuming that since he's closer to them, he loves them. So when he says karoilo, it means he means to give it to them as a gift. But a debtor, he doesn't mean to give it to them as a gift. So therefore, that's why the Gemara asked the question. A creditor, he doesn't mean to give him a gift. So that's why the Gemara asked the question only on the third one. That's why the Rimagash asked it. So the Gemara says, Amar of Nachman, why do we assume that karoilo means he wants to give him more money? So Amar of Nachman, Amar Yehuna, money, Rabbi Akiva. This is the case of Rabbi Akiva. Remember, we go back to Rabbi Akiva, which we had back on Daf Samach Gimel and Samach Daled. Rabbi Akiva said that if you sell something, you sell it. Remember, we had the whole dispute whether you sell something with an ayin yafa or an ayin rad. You sell it with the generous eye or a stingy eye. Remember that whole case. So this case is going even according to Rabbi Akiva, the Dayak Lishni Yisera, who expounds the extra words, the Tanakh, because like we learned in the case back on Samach Gimel Amud Beis and Samach Daled Amud Aleph, that we stated the following: Lo asabor v'lo asahudis. If you sell your house, you have not sold the pit or the cistern. Afal pisha kasav or umkov. Even though you say I'm selling you the house 20 feet deep, it doesn't include the pit and the cistern. And now since you sold that, since you retained the pit and the cistern, you have to buy an easement. Because Rabbi Akiva says you sell it with a stingy eye. Chamim say you don't need to buy an easement because Rabbi Akiva says you sold it with a generous eye, so therefore you have to buy an easement. Whereas the Chamim say you don't need to buy an easement because you sold it with a stingy eye. Rabbi Akiva himself would admit, where you said, I'm selling to you with the exception of the cistern and the pit, which you didn't need to say. Now he doesn't need to buy an easement because from the fact that he had that language, he clearly was holding back for himself something. So since he didn't need to say it and he said it, it means he's adding something in. Here also, since he didn't need to say the words karoilo and he added it in, it's obviously he's coming to add something in. He's adding in the idea that he's giving him money, and there's 200 zuz in addition to the money that he owes him. John Rabbanan, next case. Shlimara says, listen, as he's dying, he says, and this is also a tricky case. He says, listen, Reuven owes me $100. That's what he says as he's dying. The witnesses can write it because here we're giving like extra credence to him because he's dying utterance. Well, the guy's not going to lie as he's going out. So the witnesses write it even though they don't know that this is actually a fact. So therefore, when the person takes this document, when his heir takes this document to the court, it says, okay, the guy owes me $100. He needs to bring a proof because the fact that the witnesses wrote this isn't a proof. They just wrote down what he said, but it's not a proof. That's the position of our mayor. The witnesses shouldn't write it unless they know that it's actually true. So therefore, if this guy wants to collect it, he doesn't need to bring a proof. Why does he need to bring a proof? Because he doesn't need to bring a proof because of the fact that the witnesses would not have written it down if it wasn't true. So Amar Nachman, Amar Yehuna, Tana Rabbi, so Rabbi Nachman says Amar Yehuna, Tana. We learned in the Bryce of the opposite of this because Rabbi Meir Omer ain't kosvin, Chamim kosvin, just the opposite position. The Chum say you write it, even if you don't know it's true, and the Rabbi Meir says you don't. And only the reason why Rabbi Meir says you don't write it is because he's concerned that maybe there will be a court that won't know the law, and they'll think that you write even though you don't know it, and they'll think that it's accurate. And so therefore, Rabbi Meir says you write it because he's concerned that there'll be a bezdin that won't know this halacha, and they'll think that the witnesses wrote it only they knew it was true. And so therefore, or not for the fact that the court was mistaken, Rabbi Meir would also admit that you should write it. But he's concerned that the court will make a mistake, so he says, don't write it. So Amar Avdimi min Ardai Hilchos. So what's the law in all these cases? We're not worried about a mistake in court, so therefore you could write it. So why is this different from Rava? The Amar Rava and Cholzin LMK Makirin. Why is it different from Rava, where where Rava says when it comes to a person, a woman who falls to levirate marriage, that we say we don't. The court does not do a chalitza LMK Makirin unless they know for sure that they know that this guy is the Yavam, he's the person who she's falling to in marriage. You have to know the person. So Manin, and we don't allow the girl to reject the marriage if she's under 12, LMK Makirin, unless we know that in fact that this is his wife. We don't allow it. Lefikach kosvin get chalitza v'get miyun. So therefore, these witnesses who saw the chalitza or the miyun, they write for her a get chalitza, a contract of chalitza, and a get miyun. Even though the witnesses don't know, because the court knows, and that's why it wouldn't have happened. My time, now what's the reason why Rava says that the court does not only does the chalitza if they know it? Isn't it because that we're concerned about a mistaken court? Because if we're going to say that the court does it even though they don't know it, we have to be concerned that maybe the second court will allow her to do the marriage without first checking it. So then we see from here we're concerned about a mistaken court. The Gemara says no. Well, Beis Dina Basar, Beis Dina Lo Daiki. A court, even though we're not, generally speaking not concerned about a mistaken court, the court is going to always investigate the witnesses bringing it in, but they're not going to check out another court. A court doesn't review another court's rulings. A Beis Dina Basar Edim Daiki, they will check another witness's rulings. And so therefore, that's the distinction between the cases. So we'll just do this last case. The Mishnah says, "Av Toa Shemachil Makom Misha Yirtza." What are we talking about here? Somebody writes all his assets to his son after his death, meaning say, "I'm giving you the principal today, but the fruits I am going to keep." And now he dies, and basically, the father, whatever is not connected to the ground, the father could take up whatever is not connected to the ground. And he could give them while he's alive to everybody who wants. But, meaning to say, he's only giving him the fruits after his death. But Masheniach Towash, but Hareu Shal Yorshin. And that which is removed from the ground after he dies belongs to the heirs and not to the one who got the gift because it was removed from the ground. So it's the father's. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? Towash in Mechuberlo, mean to say whatever the father left removed belongs to the heirs, but that which he left attached belongs to the one who got the gift. But we have a problem with this. But we have a brisa in Ksubos that tells us that if the son sells we learned in Tosefta about in the case where a person writes his assets to his son from today until after his death, and the son sells the assets while his father is still alive, and then the father died, then the purchaser is entitled to the principal, but not to the fruits that are attached to the ground. And so we see from here, shaman es we have to deduct the part that's still attached to the ground, meaning he has to pay for it. The guy, in that case, in Ksuos, the person who gave his son the principal and not the fruits, and the son sold the principal, and then the father died, the purchaser has to reimburse the other heir, or the son, or the heirs, for the stuff that's still attached to the ground. But in our case here, we're saying that whoever he gave it to has the stuff that's attached, it's not the stuff that's detached. Gemara explains the distinction is lokasha kamba beno kamba acher. No, if he's giving it to his son, it's distinct than if he's giving it to somebody else. Meaning to say, if he's giving it to his son, then we say that the father is saying, I'm also giving to him the fruits that'll be attached to the ground when he dies. And so therefore, that's what we're talking about here. He's giving so therefore, so basically our mission is talking about a case where the father wrote the assets to the son, and the son didn't sell the assets to somebody else while his father was still alive. And so then we say that the father intends to give to the son also the fruits that are attached to the ground while he dies. Whereas In the Brisa, what we're talking about is that the son sold the assets to another person while his father was still alive. And about this, we say that the purchaser does not really acquire the fruits that are attached to the ground, because the father does not want to give to him the fruits that are attached to the ground unless he will only on the condition that he gets them and not the purchaser. And the distinction is, he wants to give more to his son. And so therefore, for a son who gives the land with the fruits that are attached to it, but to another person, he only wants to give him the land. You had a question, Jeff?
Selling land, not selling the fruits on